Hi, women. I'm Adelaide, if you're new to me and my work. And this is Mandy.
Hi.
Mandy and I are colleagues and dear friends, and we get down on birth and body work and the overlap between biomechanics, manual therapy, and midwifery. But even more than that, we have found sort of like a deep and evolving sisterhood in our ethical and spiritual approach to our work and our service. And I'm so excited to be able to be in conversation with you about these topics that I feel like have come up for both of us in our work as of late. And I'm just so grateful to be having this call. So, just to offer what this is, if you're here listening to this, we entitled this Women's Service: How Bad Care Paves the Way for Good Care. And while you and I have talked about this for 4 years with relative consistency, um, as we were trying to outline like what we wanted to share on this topic, what was the most important for me, and then I'll offer you the mic in a minute, Mandy, was to come forward with a true sort of reverence for this topic and a humility in regards to my own opinions here on bad care paving the way to good care. And my hope is that by the end of this talk, that you don't know more, but that you're more curious about the things that you don't know. And that I'm not here to educate anyone on ethics and care, but instead to humbly join us in a community conversation around who and how we are in the ethical walk that birth work requires, right? And how we want to step into that with humility and continuity, which is an ongoing curiosity for me and has been for the entirety of my 10-year career in birth. And I doubt it will stop anytime soon. So I know that when we were talking about what we wanted to say, people are like, what are your thoughts on licensure, non-licensure, home birth, hospital birth, radical care, like radical change versus harm reduction, like, like this medical, that medical, like weigh in. And my first thought is the basic premise of those questions comes from an entire intellectual and ethical purview that I do not possess. So the entire premise of what's being asked makes those questions unanswerable to me and also to my bestie here, which is why we're having this conversation together, because they're based on a reality that does not reflect the world in which I live. And I humbly try to be a student and share my work from my own experience. So it's my little intro to this talk on bad care, good care, ethics, and service. The format for this, Mandy's going to be asking me some questions and sharing her opinions, and we'll go back and forth, sort of interview style, and then we'll open up for questions at the end. Our goal is to keep this to 90 minutes or less. Keep in mind this conversation, my interest is that it endures for the duration of your lifetime. So, okay, Mandy, that's what I got to start. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Mandy, and yeah, introductions always get me because I still don't know who I am completely and how what this work is meant to be. I can tell you where I've come from and where we're at now, but wow, I cannot say like who I truly, truly am. That's still changing. Um, on paper, I am a licensed midwife and have been doing that for the last dozen years. Before that, I was a birth doula. And when I first started out in birth work, I had such a clear idea of what I thought was the right way to do it. and the right way to become a birthwork provider. And then that completely crumbled 4 years ago. But what's interesting is I'm still a licensed midwife on paper, but everything about my work has changed. And getting the only thing that I've been able to get clear on is my values and how I want to show up for my work. But I'm still figuring out the licensure bit truly. And when we were talking about like we still haven't figured out, or no, we're still currently like licensed and unlicensed at this juncture, but will that be forever? Up for discussion. And we can talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But wow, I think it took me personally a massive crisis in relation to licensure in order for me to truly come face to face with what I value, how I want to show up, and what my community needs. And we'll talk about those touchstones down the road. But let that be the thing that maybe you become more clear on. Yes, there'll be more questions, but also the thing that you get to anchor to is actually just truth of who you are as a human and how you relate to your world in this moment. And this talk makes me the most nervous. I'll name that. It's different than talking about something like shoulder dystocia or birth tears.
Which
This is,
those are coming later in the
those
week,
are
kind of. If
coming.
you're interested, like if you want the details, we're all here for the birth chats of like practicality. But this one is the one that we're having behind the scenes
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. And both me and Addie hate talking about ourselves and our personal lives, but this topic, I would say, for me, is going to be the most personal one. And
Mhm,
we shall see what comes up.
mhm, mhm. Wow. Yeah. Where might this lead us? It's really the question. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, just some of the backdrop, and I've just been had such, what we wanted to model and why we wanted to have this conversation together is to be modeling what it looks like to be in conversation and be in relationship, right? Rather than, either of us, we both have our social media presences, we both have our robust businesses, and then we also collaborate in our businesses and but that's all like what it looks like. But what is at the heart of that is we're in deep and intimate relationship with one another. And it's what allows us to explore these topics with a sense of grace and intimacy and timeliness and spaciousness. And that is also like the invitation that we want to offer is like how across difference has allowed us to really look at the choices that we're making and why, and be able to examine them outside of the lens of what is right and what is wrong, outside of the lens of protection of I feel better because I know I'm right. I feel protected because of my fill in the blank. And who are we when we take away this idea of societal protection and actually sit with our peerdom and sit with the fact that we're just trying to be in service together, right? And so our backgrounds couldn't be more different. And when we encountered each other somehow by the grace of God, when we were brought together, we found that the way
Praise
we,
be to Instagram.
what?
Praise be to Instagram. That's how this.
Well, ain't that something? And then, but we're now definitely IRL friends. I just lived with Mandy's family for weeks and weeks very recently. And, but like we found in one another more similarity and kinship in the way we practice our midwifery than with anyone else we'd ever encountered. Does that feel true to you?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
like,
you're my closest colleague,
yeah,
truly.
you're my closest colleague,
Mhm.
which like, oh, can we just have a moment? I mean, make me cry. And like just the fact that you're my closest colleague and I'm your closest colleague, and our background in education couldn't be more disparate. But our devotion and what we have seen has brought us into the inquiry, right? Of course, it's at the heart of our collaborations of birth and body work, right? But also ethics and service.
Mhm.
And we talk so much about the birth and body work. If you're here because you're familiar with our Born Through Movement curriculum, amazing. We'll talk about that later. But what's at the heart of our Born Through Movement curriculum is ethics and service, which is what we're really here to talk about today, right? Especially in our contemporary birth culture moment of unassisted birth, ethics, leadership, authority. What do you think? Weigh in. What are your opinions? and we're just like, not that, but
Yeah.
instead, how we both actually orient in our practices and how we found kinship there, and how that might humbly be something that can help all of you navigate the vast ethical questions that I feel like have been at the heart of our relationship for the entirety of our relationship and continue to be what sustains us both in our service to women.
Mhm. And one thing I want
Which,
to make is that we're
yeah,
talking about context and these big picture things, but we also personally have dissected the nitty-gritty of like using a Doppler at home and I'm not licensed and talking to this person who's licensed and working together. All those nitty-gritty things have come up, and I want to just allow you that if you have a nitty-gritty scenario that you want to bring forward into discussion, put it in the chat, and maybe we'll make space for like
yeah,
verbal live response too.
yeah.
But we love
And
context and we love the nitty-gritty at the same
thank
time.
you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because we've learned through actually doing the work and like, well, who are you when you have to have, like, that's a great example. Who are you with the vaginal tears? Who are you with the Doppler at home? Who are you with overskilled, underskilled? Who are you when you're burnt out? Who are you when like, and how are you? And what do you do there? And what I do is I call you and and to some extent, like, and other, you know what I mean? Like what I do is be in collaboration across this spectrum. Right. And that's really what I want. Like I, was on the phone having this conversation with, with an OB colleague of mine. We talked to them over 2 hours this morning around these like ethical questions and like how, and like the clients that we both have right now and like what we're supposed to do. And like, what a gift. Like she is like, doing very, very different work than me, right? She's a surgeon primarily. And who, is like texting me about one of her clients. And I'm like, I have this client that I think should actually be your client because you're better suited. She's like, I have so many clients that should be your clients because I think you're better suited. But these are the clients we have, and what do we have to do? Well, thank God we can actually put down the stigma and the dogma across the board so we can actually serve, right? And in those nitty-gritty moments. And that's what we want to be able to offer. So, okay. We're kind of talking about what we're talking about, which is a little annoying. Should
Let's
we just
actually
dive
talk
in?
about the
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as questions come up from you all watching, for us personally, directly, put them in and we'll pause and address as we go. Okay, let's start with the biggest question of them all, which is, what is the greatest ethical dilemma that you have faced in your birth work?
Wow. Right. And we wrote these questions as though they were a good idea. Wow. What an interesting. So providing care is rife with ethical questions and contradictions. And I think where I found myself is like, I want to do what's ethical. Right. And like, I'm very oriented that way in general. I'm like a piety principle, whatever. That's like how I personally am. But within that, I'm like, where's the walk for me to be like the most respectful, the most in service, the most integral, right? And I think the biggest ethical dilemma that I faced was really my come to Jesus moment with the understanding that no matter how I chose to practice, that there was no option that didn't put me within the ethical paradox that I would be providing bad care to someone at some point and maybe for a while. And my desire to like not provide bad care, and then the gauntlet that I had to realize that there was no avoiding bad care, was for me the biggest kind of ethical gauntlet, and still is the ethical dilemma that I have to walk in birth work. And what I mean by that is like, I can't avoid formation. I can't bypass skill. I can't go directly to skillful, good care just because I want to and I recognize it. And being able to recognize good care, obviously, that even is a bit of a learning curve. But just because I'm like, this is what I want to do doesn't mean I can. right? And it doesn't mean I can either because of my opportunity, because of my environment, because of my community, right? But even more so because of my actual skill. And what I mean by that is, you only get good at something through practice, right? And the quandary that who I have to practice on is my peers, that who I have to practice on is women, that who I have to practice on is babies that are incarnating, right? And women that are choosing to have me with them in the moment that their babies incarnate into potentially my arms, or like practice on their genitals, right? And like their sex lives for the rest of their lives. Like the stakes are high, right? And I'm going to do it poorly because there's no pathway for us to be excellent at anything without being at best mediocre at it first. And I spent years trying to kind of figure out a way to avoid the trial and formation out of a belief that it was possible, right? And for me to really come into the maturity, I think for me in my own practice, that there is no exaltation without trial and formation. There's just not, right? And so what am I willing to do there? And how do I sleep at night if I have to live with that, right? And that's no small potatoes ethical dilemma, right? And that really humbled me against being like, oh, that conveyor belt care in the system, or like, oh, that OB who's like exhausted and burnt out and has to section her. I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like truly. And for me to come to that understanding from an embodied place of service was the most humbling thing that has happened to me and continues to happen in my birth work. And then it also, um, it just, I continue to have to walk with that ethical question of what skills do I build and on who? And what things am I willing to say yes to being underskilled? And then the even bigger ethical dilemma is who isn't underskilled, right? Which there's so much skill to have. And we live in a moment and in a culture where understanding the depth of like what we do and like our like I just like your manual practice is good. And you know it. And my biomechanical practice is good and I know it. And those are two pieces that we were like, all right, we're good at that corner of the world of trying to serve. Oh my God. Like, and just that, like, I'm not going to be the best at almost all of it forever because of human limitation. And then who am I when I want to provide what I like to think is possible or what I want to have be available to women? And that, yeah, that's the ethical dilemma, right? And then to be quite concrete about it, to give an example, right? The one we wrote here is if you want to be good at repairing vaginal tears, you have to do a bunch of bad ones to get there, right? Bummer, because you just did a bad surgical repair on someone's genitals, and that'll impact her genital function, her sexual function, likely for the rest of her life. Bummer. Can you sleep with that at night? Or if I don't choose to incorporate suturing into my practice, I leave women unsutured because I'm not skilled enough, right? And then they live with that for the rest of their lives. And I know they could have been better served if I was more skilled. So who's more important? The poorly sutured women or the women who are left unsutured? Right? And who do we learn on? There's no answer to this question, but the desire to hide from that question through other questions like home birth, hospital birth, licensure, non-licensure, skilled, unskilled, sutured, unsutured. Like my interest is to invite all of us to not hide from those questions because that's what actually prohibits us from providing the most loving and effective care for one another.
Mm-hmm. What I am reminded of is that both of us, for many years, and I'll speak for myself at this point, but I think for you too, there were many years where we both truly believed that our pathway to birth work and to midwifery was the right one. And then we both came to a point where the ideology failed as we were doing our work. And then what? So I just want to name too that, us talking about these ethical questions, that wasn't always the case. Like there was a time where it felt like the right thing to do. And then the work got really hard. And we started questioning the ideology. And so another question that we want to dissect a bit more is the difference between ideology and ethics. And then we can maybe give examples from both of our lines of work as well, like the history of what got us to this point.
Um, maybe it's revisionist history. I don't know, but like, yes, I really like thought,
I'll give an example for mine. Like
yeah,
when I was
yeah, go
16,
ahead.
I was like, we don't need more OBs, we need more midwives. And oh my gosh, Canada is doing it the absolute best of any country in the world. Licensed midwives who are integrated with home and hospital birth. There's nothing better. And that was the egotistical mind for many, many years. And then you inevitably experience conflict. You inevitably experience bad outcomes and a reckoning that actually that really sucked. You actually didn't give good care in the system that you thought would enable the best possible care for every single person.
For every single person.
Yeah.
I love that you brought it back to when you were 16. It's helpful for me to remember. I'm like, oh yeah, no, there was a time. I'm like, oh, when I started, I was like, oh, I was like a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like busy doula. And then I taught all the childbirth ed classes at the hospital, and I taught all my local prenatal, whatever, movement classes. And I was certain that the way I could then serve my community best would be become a midwife under this idea that I could kind of exert more influence because I was frustrated by the lack of influence I had essentially in all of those roles, like by my
And
doula
maybe
role.
even birth outcomes, right? Because that's kind of where my brain started. Like, oh, if we have more midwives, births will go better.
Right, exactly. Or I was like, oh, if I wasn't just the childbirth educator and the doula and her prenatal and postpartum yoga teacher, and if I brought my biomechanical knowledge like into her birth, and I was actually the midwife that could call the shots, right, her birth outcomes would be better.
And then for me, it was I was a doula as well for a hot minute, and I was like, but if I just had the medical skills and I can use them with integrity, that they're
Right.
only ever used when they're needed, you know?
Uh-huh. Oh, I did that too. For sure. I mean, just that for me. And I'm like, oh, I go to midwifery school tomorrow. And that's essentially what I did. Right. And it, how humbling to think back on ourselves 10, for me, that was maybe 10 years ago, which it, um, yeah, you really do grow. And thank goodness. And like what has allowed me to do that is essentially practice and the humility that is intrinsic to being in service to the body, which is not contained within an ideology, because an ideology is an idea and the body is a corporeal reality.
Mhm.
So, to this question that you just asked, what's the difference between ideology and ethics? Um, in my understanding, ideology is what prohibits us from making ethical choices, right? Because ideologies tell us what the ideas are. And ethics is what allows us to negotiate who we are when those fall apart, which is a very different thing. And let me see if I can be more clear here. Like what I put in my notes is like ideology is what prohibits us from making ethical choices that reckon with like the messy and changing biological reality of birth work, that they insulate us from the body by remaining in the mind, right? Another way to put that is if our ideology says this is what's right, then that capacity to be like, who am I and what are my ethical choices? Meaning, like, how do I not lose the forest through the trees here? how do I stay focused on what is best in exalting this mom and this baby in this body in this circumstance, right? Ideologies conveniently answer those questions for us across the board. That's what they are, right? And in that way, they often insulate us from being in the messy reality that is the aliveness of birth, right? And not just birth, women's health, and maybe life more broadly, but if we're trying to keep it contained, at least in this conversation. So I personally used, as did you, and at all these different moments, interestingly enough, right? Different ideologies to sort of avoid the individual reckoning that's required, right? And to focus on what you believe about birth versus who you are in birth is this is the epitome of gaslighting and bypassing actual service to women, right? If this is what I believe about birth, as opposed to like who I am in this moment, then I'm not actually in service to the woman. Does that make sense? Like I'm in service to what it is that I think about the woman. And then we can often use these ideologies to then gaslight and bypass. And then I think what's done so much is there's so much talk about birth ideologies, and there's less talk about skills and ethics, right? And there's less talk about like, how can I answer this as concisely as possible? Like, what do you do in these messy scenarios in a way that doesn't just refer you back self kind of referentially to what we're told to think about the scenarios? Because then that insulates us from actually like giving differentiated care, right? And this happens all over the board, right? This happens in protocol. This happens in obstetrics. This happens in midwifery. This happens in unassisted birth culture. This happens in licensed midwifery culture. It happens in unlicensed midwifery culture. If I have this list of things that this is what I do because I am this, this is what I do because this is what I believe about birth, then that puts me in my beliefs about birth and not in the actual body with the woman and the baby, right? And if I'm going to be able to be present in that body with that woman and that baby, I need the skill to do so. And I need the ethical grounding to be flexible enough to stomach those transitions. And the core of at least my work is how do I help women build skills, right? Which is what I work on in Born Through Movement. And how do I help women discern their own unique ethics and what they want to work with, which is what the work I do in women's work. And those are like the two main things that I feel like have helped me move forward, is not like this side, that side, but skill building and ethic formation, skill building and ethics formation, because that's the only thing that's allowed me to continue in working in service to women. And like, and we can get better at it. I think that's the other thing. We can get better at making hard ethical choices. And the only thing that's made me get better at it is it being forced to do so, essentially. And by getting better at it, what I mean is loving women through it, right? Loving myself through it, being able to be sustainable and being able to be present with other women through that. And I don't want to be like cryptic. Maybe you can help me give some examples, Mandy. Or like, do you have
I
any
can
thoughts here?
take it back just like a little tiny minute.
Yeah.
Devil's advocate that ideology itself also isn't bad.
Yeah.
And I'll claim that specific ideologies that I was exposed to 4 years ago gave me the gift of deep inquiry in order for me to realize what I actually value. So let's also not be like, oh, all ideologies equal cult. No, it's a way that humans are trying to search for truth in a way
What a
and
gift.
like be grounded in something when there aren't answers until there are answers, or maybe a more sense of truth. And I feel like you can't really take away the conversation of ideology and ethics without theology. So I'll plant that seed for us if we want to go into that.
Do we? Let's give it a minute. Like, I guess like, hang on, maybe we can lead us there, but I just want to respond to this for a moment. Like, Of course, ideologies aren't bad. None of it, and I'm sorry if I sort of offered that perspective. It's just not embodied. It's just not about the body. That's all.
Mhm.
And birth is. It's just that simple to me, where like ideologies are ideas, right? And like to me, ethics is like what you do in the moment, right? Who are you in that moment? Like irrespective of your ideas about who you should be in that moment. And how do you build skill there, right? And like resilience and nervous system capacity and conversational skills and relational skills.
Mhm.
And nervous system capacity.
Inevitably, regardless of the licensed or non-licensed, you are going to come into conflict with your client who you thought was so aligned. And then what? And
Not
that
the
was
alignment
okay.
question.
I'll talk because I'll share more personal things probably than you, but
We love this one. I only
I
want aligned clients. And we're like, I kind of like don't in some ways. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I literally made a chart. I still have that diary where I was like, give up my license, keep my license, pros, cons, like with my family, with my community, like it went on. And the number one thing that I
And I
was
got to
like,
know you during this.
correct. And during this time, Nova was 3 months old and I had prolapse incontinence, probably related to my crisis. And I'm
Prolapse and
like,
continence. And
help
then you
me.
joined women's work and we healed it.
And the thing that my brain really liked was realizing that the things that are making me so uncomfortable in my work right now won't actually change, or I won't be saved from it if I give up my license. Conflict, which, oh my gosh, makes me so uncomfortable, like miscommunication, making mistakes, that's actually not going to change. Um, and it's the reality of birth work because we're working with humans who are relational and spiritual, and the body doesn't always work well. Like it's going to happen, and you get to choose how you're wanting to show up and with what skills. And there is actually maybe no right or wrong of how you get there. Um, yeah, I'll pause there for a second. And maybe another thing in terms of right or wrong, I realized that I wasn't honest with my clients because I got to rely on protocols and, my license dictating what I should or shouldn't say,
Mhm.
and coming to the realization that that was actually making me lie or cover things up.
Mhm.
And I wanted to change that. And I was able to change that without having to give up my license.
Mm. It's so beautiful, right? What a beautiful example.
What would happen, like the question I asked myself, maybe I think you maybe helped me get to that point too, was what would happen if nothing in my work system changed, but I was 100% honest with clients about everything?
That
Like,
sounds like a question I would have asked you.
yeah, then what? And that
Right.
includes like not lying when I transfer someone in and like faking her vaginal exam so that I protect her from the nurses or system. Like even that. Like what would it be like to be completely honest with everyone? Um,
And just like
that was
trying
like
that
an
100%.
that was an ethical reckoning in that moment for me. And it took away the crisis around licensure.
For me, I just had a prenatal visit this morning where I had a bit of an ethical reckoning where I'm a little nervous about this birth, right? I was a midwife for the last birth. It was quite complicated. I would have made different choices in hindsight because guess what, women, bad care paves the way to good care. By the grace of God, the outcomes were fine. And like I provided a lot of good care in that birth, and I provided a lot of care that I can't stand behind in the same way now, or I wouldn't do the same now. And whoa, how intense that is. And now we're walking into her next birth together, right? And she's like, are you okay? Like, do you have like the heebie-jeebies around my birth? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I can still show up for your family. And she was like, and like it was this moment of true relational transparency of like I can be grounded and skillful and clear. And I have enough personal, I guess, capacity to be assured in the way I can be in that birth space, regardless of my personal like concern or heebie-jeebies or like fear, really. Like, I know that I can walk that line with grace and dignity and good care for her family. Otherwise, I wouldn't do what I do if I didn't know that. But is it like perfect? Is it not influence what I would do? Um, I, it does. And just that transparency, right? That transparency with that client. And when she still has an option to be like, no, I actually want someone who maybe doesn't actually have this like deep sort of fear and concern that I'm not going to be able to like uproot out of my own experience. Right. And then we can have that, conversation. And it's, the walk of honesty is hard to walk. And I think I was definitely kind of taught, as were you, that the licensure non-licensure question got to answer that for us. This is what
Mhm.
you're allowed to say. This is what you're not. Licensed midwives lie to their clients and unlicensed midwives don't. Right.
And also that the licensure allows you as the birth worker to somehow be more comfortable. That's
Right.
a
How many times have I been like,
oh,
oh God, I want your license. And you'd be like, oh God, I want your non-licensure status. Like we have literally just like bleeding heart wanted each other's practices off and on and back and forth. And we'll continue to
and it's
likely.
honestly unending. Like there's always the births that are like, oh, grass is greener over there.
Literally. And it's like just this continuous thing that we then continue to learn within because we're willing to be in relationship across and willing to actually not just take refuge in sort of the false security of the ideology and instead sit with these ethical questions and leave ideology where it's helpful, right? Which is, um, well, where do we think it's helpful? Because this for us is a
I
theology.
can't really answer that question.
Yeah, exactly. Like which do you want to lead us where you were sort of insinuating?
No.
Very good.
Um, yeah, when is ideology actually useful? I don't know. I think it's useful until it's not, but
It's useful until it's not, and that maybe it allows us to think differently. And do you know
correct.
what's really important? Thinking differently. Do you know what's like not always the most important is the way that you think and thinking that you're right. And thinking differently is quite useful. Thinking that you're right is quite unuseful in many circumstances, right? And so where is that line? That's a discernment line that just gets fleshed out through practice.
Yeah, and the thing that I anchor back to after difficult births or births where I felt so uncomfortable or I made a mistake is regardless of what I thought was right or wrong, what matters the most is just plainly who I am before God and anchoring back to the people in my life that see me for who I am versus this client that I might never see again or the colleagues that I work with but who I'm not actually giving care to directly, like who is reflecting back or just seeing you for who you truly are regardless of your decision making during a birth. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's so fascinating because it pokes a little like this is a hard question, right? Because what that then puts the focus on is back on a relational capacity, right? And what we really want to have is this world where midwives are perfect and they serve at the feet of women. And then we simultaneously, so many of those women then want to like become those birth attendants, right? And it's just this like kind of quagmire where like we're all serving our peers. And this idea that good intentions, right, are like not enough or something, which I understand. I do think that like skill and honesty and ethical reckoning are far more important than good intentions. And but I also think that it's like how can I say this? Like when you were just saying like who actually sees me for what I'm trying to provide, right? And I think for many years I made it so that my like clients were the women that had to reflect that back to me, which actually put so much pressure for me on women. Like it's me putting pressure on my clients for their birth outcomes and for how they feel about their birth outcomes, right? Which is not actually me serving them. That's me constellating my service in some like weird reciprocity, which isn't actually, which like then, and we talk about this a lot, this like reciprocity culture and like, this like, we're all like working together as opposed to like, I can stand with my own choices because I know my ethics and I know I'm working to build skills. I know I'm going to make mistakes and I know that I can walk my walk in those moments relationally. It doesn't mean I do it perfectly. It doesn't mean I never say the wrong thing. It doesn't mean I never make a mistake, but it means I know what I believe and I know why I believe it and I know what influences it and I know what supports it. And I've built the skill to be able to practice it in real time in my birth work. And so then I'm not like waiting and constellating only within my client midwifery relationship, but I've taken that responsibility on truly, right? Of my own kind of ethical and spiritual and skill formation. And that can happen across the board, right?
100%.
And I often think it's that does not happen across the board. I think that doesn't happen in obstetrics. I think it doesn't happen in a lot of midwifery care. I think it doesn't happen in a lot of licensed or unlicensed care. It's that lack of, this is what I think, this is why I think it, these are my ethics, and this is how I can stand behind it. And my willingness to be honest about that. And that not happening, then we have this sort of like misplaced authority and resentment and
And just
self-blame.
like,
And
it won't happen. There's gonna be times where that just doesn't happen at all, where you just
but
do not get the oh, I love what you said about like how you related your like your value came from the relationship to the client and the outcome and how they reflected that back. Let's just say that feels so good though, like when you get it right and
it's
you
great
offer
when
to
you get it
share,
right.
there's a
But you
great
know
outcome.
but you know what this talk is about and what our work is about is what happens when you don't. Because
Exactly.
that's
100%.
what people don't want to talk about. What happens when you don't get it right? And what happens? How do you get to getting it right? You get it wrong first.
Yeah.
And you get it wrong maybe a bunch of times. And then people like drop out and don't continue and don't learn and say, I'm bored with birth, or I don't think this, or this ideology was misplaced, or that was the problem, or like, and then we just give up. And it's so boring to me. It makes me so upset because it's so, oh, it's making me cry. It's so hard. It's so hard to be humble. It's so hard to be in service. It's so hard to learn how to do this in an environment that isn't geared to teach us. It's not geared to teach us on with licensure or unlicensure or obstetrics or whatever. Like it's a hard thing to do. And if you feel the call, I just want to uplift women that feel that call, that want to uplift women and sustain you in that. And what allows us to sustain ourselves in that is this ethical building and this ethical skill building that allows us to withstand what's actually required to walk humbly in service. And it's like, it's such a hard thing to do. And it's just, and we undermine our ability to do it when we like, when we say that's not it, and that's not it, and that's not it, and this isn't it, and like, and just, or like, or then, oh, God forbid you actually, and we and I have both done this, actually make a grave error. Like, those are the women that become the best. They're the women who do the best. Like forged by your pathway through the shadow in the valley of death. Like it's just what, like we can't, going back to the original point, right? Like the avoidance of trial and formation, right? And like what that does is it undermines our capacity to grow and be the care providers that we want to be, right? And the hypercritical environment that we're in that like minimizes just how hard that is and like maximizes who's on the right side of history. Like
Mm.
we can be complicit in creating a culture that minimizes our capacity to care for one another. And like my only goal is to like help us create a culture that doesn't do that. Right. So that we all might humbly be able to serve each other a little bit better and have a little bit better outcomes for moms and babies.
Yeah. Beautiful. And this is what we connected on when we were both in the crisis of talking about licensure, non-licensure. And I want to offer some touchstones that we might all
And hang on,
question.
I just want
Yeah.
to add licensure, non-licensure of me being like, do I sit the board exam? And you being like, do I give up my career? I really want to add that that conversation for us was like unlicensed and a full busy practice, licensed and a full busy practice. You being like, do I give up the license to have an unlicensed practice? And being like, do I sit the board exam to have a licensed practice? Like literally the swap. We're both successful, right? We're both like working in the field. We're both having women say, we want you. And we connected on our be like, but I want what you have. And you're being like, but I want what I have. And how quickly the scales fall and how quickly the house of cards collapses if you're willing to be in relationship with the deep ethical quandary that's at the heart of all of this, which is like, we're going to do it badly. There's no avoiding doing it badly. There's no doing it perfectly. There's no ethical higher ground within reason, right?
Mhm,
Within.
mhm, mhm. And there were specifically three questions. We didn't know in the moment we were talking about this and having our crises that these were the three questions, but we've come up with three questions that actually allowed us to not change anything about our business structure,
Yeah, we're
but
still doing it.
we're still doing it. But it changed everything about how we show up for that work and how we can just anchor to reality in the face of hard births and ethical reckoning. And so I'll name the three questions, then we can kind of dissect them a little bit. Does that sound good?
Yeah, thank God. Back to the outline.
Yeah. So the three questions that we asked ourselves were, oh gosh, I want to give up my license because over there seems easier and more comfortable. And then I can serve with more ease. But then, oh my gosh, what is my service? What actually is the work that I'm supposed to be doing on this earth? That was question one. And number two, what's real in the body? We are both, we were so influenced by, for me, the medical opinions on birth, and then you, the opposite. But then we came to the reality of like, oh, sometimes this, the system this ideology works in can be supportive, and then the opposite can also be true. But what's true for this body right now? And the bodies in my community, and then what's real for my actual community, and what are their needs, and where can I serve? How can I show up for my community that I'm in right now, um, with their highest good in mind? And the community that I live and work in right now is best served with me keeping my license. And that might change.
Yeah, it might change.
That's the reality. Yeah.
And you might change.
Yeah. And I might
And
move.
um I just want to sort of state that in maybe a different way of like how I've asked these three questions that we've come up with. Now, we're talking about licensure, non-licensure. This could also be talked about to repair. Well, hang on. This could also be talked about for home birth, hospital birth. This could also be talked about for, do I want radical change in my community or do I want harm reduction in my community? Right? These are all things that I've been on both sides of, both of them, all of those questions. Like home birth, hospital birth, licensure, non-licensure, obstetrics, midwifery, radical change, harm reduction. I spent time on every side of all of those questions, right? And like the three questions that we wrote, right? How do we serve? Meaning like, where am I? How do I sleep at night? How can I orient ethically, right? What's going to allow me to actually serve, right? Which is a good question. Because if women are like, I'm not willing to serve outside of the licensure system because that puts my family at risk. That's a good answer. Like, I want us to think about that. I want that to not be a bad thing to say. I want that to be like, oh, thank God we're trying to figure out what makes it sustainable for you so that we're actually able to become the women that we want to become. So actually able to sustain what it is that we know that we all need more skill building, which requires that we figure out a way to stay in it. So like, versus like, how do we serve? Like, I've never until very recently lived in a state in the United States where there was a license for me to possess. What license? The license I'm not allowed to use? Oh, right. That's the thing I'll orient my life around. Like, what are we doing? Right. So that's that first question, right? How do we serve? And then like the second question that I loved is like, this is a broad question, but like what's real in the body versus like what's real in my body, what can my nervous system sustain? But then also what's real in the body of this client, right? Like I am totally of the ilk that our health history and medical history is influential in our births. It is. I see that. I have women who are like, I don't think I'm right for you. I have women who are like, I think you'd be better served. I have women who are like, I think that makes me nervous. And this idea where we're like, oh, everyone's a perfect XYZ client. I was talking with my OB colleague today, where she has a mom who had three sections with her first three babies, couldn't find anyone to VBAC her, birthed her fourth baby at home successfully, right, by herself because no one would help her, and then is now pregnant with her fifth and is like, I'm not a good surgical candidate. She had life-threatening complications after C-section number two and three, right? And then she had a successful unassisted home birth, VBAC, right? And now she's like, can I do this in the hospital? Like, I actually want more, like this, like I want more safety and support for me and my baby. And like, yeah, she had complicated sections. She had her own birth and like, she doesn't want to do this again. Like, yes, there's like these different candidates for these different things. And like, what's actually real for these women as opposed to like, which is also like, which then brings us to our next question is what's real for this community? Like, what do the women in front of us want? And I orient towards this question over and over and over again. It's not what I want to offer. That's not service. I want to shout that from the rooftops. If it's like, I think this is cool, you should know about it. That's not service. That's something else. What people ask of me and how well I'm able to try to rise to the call of the ask, that's service. So if my community is asking me, will you be my doula? Will you come in and orient this way with me? That's a beautiful ask. I want a woman to be honored by that ask, right? And is she willing to serve there? Is she willing to walk the ethical walk that requires, right? Is her community calling her to be a home birth midwife? Because there are none. That's what my community called me to be. There was no one. And I was like, I'm not trained. I'm not enough. I don't know enough. And everyone was like, please, 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 right? For years. And so I've gotten a little bit better at it, right? And like, it's like what's actually needed in my community. And now I'm in a different community. What's needed here? And how do we actually keep coming back to these guiding questions as opposed to, and these are just ours, right? And I'm sure there's plenty of others we could think about, right? But these ones like, how do we serve? Like, how are we actually able to do that, right? What even, we get these questions all the time of like, I want to serve in birth. Do I go to midwifery school? Do I do that? I'm like, well, what can you actually do? Right? You're like, you, Mandy, had the opportunity. You're like, you knew you wanted to do this. And you were like, I need to move across the world. I need to move to a different country to be able to even like figure out how to do this skill building. And you had that opportunity and you took it. Thank God. Because look at you now. Right. And like, I didn't have that opportunity. Right. And like, who was I then? And like we're all working with such different circumstances. And it's so humbling to realize the limitations that we have to work within. And can we just be like collaborative and supportive within those limitations, essentially, rather than divisive and, focused on what's best for who, best for what women, like best for which community, best for which body, best for which family. Like, it's just not that straightforward.
And it's this collaboration and our willingness to prioritize these questions. Also, I'm realizing if I was so hung up on licensure, I would never have asked you for my pelvic health care. An unlicensed physiotherapist, what does she know? Oh my gosh, I actually want that. I want what she's offering, regardless of the licensure.
And if I was so hung up on my identity, you think I would have been like, Mandy, I will fly you to a different country, thousands of miles, to come to me, to help me, to work with me to make Born Through Movement, because your expertise is so valuable to me, because you have had the opportunity to see more than I have, because of the reality of medical formation and the reality of what conveyor belt care provides. Conveyor belt care provides practice. Is there an ethical issue? Rife, is rife with ethical issues. And do you know what it provides? Such an asset to me that you have that.
Yeah,
So then,
let's just name that. Like this was so useful for me to hear you say. It's like, yeah, your touch skill is so amazing because you've had the ability to do thousands of vaginal exams on women, half of whom probably were numbed up.
they can't
And
even feel you
like
fumbling,
that's the ethical reality of becoming a midwife in the system.
right?
However, and I reckon with that and I've accepted that and done all the forgiveness work and whatnot. But
And
I'm so
we'll maybe continue to, and it'll come back in different styles and moments. And
correct.
like that's an ethical reckoning that we have to be willing to do.
Correct. And the reality too is that people who get to do degrees and apprenticeships and touch bodies like a conveyor belt have amazing skills.
Well, some of them,
Some of them, they
and
have
some
the
of them don't.
opportunity to develop skills very quickly. Let's put it that way.
They have what?
They have the opportunity to develop civic skills very quickly.
They have the opportunity to develop skills. And we've
And
also,
we'll talk about this in our tears chat, but the best people to repair your tear are those who've been able to practice on all parts of the body and
Mhm.
get like super good at it. And those are the surgeons, you know?
And like we're going to table that because we could talk about tears and repairs, and we will for 2
It's
hours
the hook to get you guys to come to the next
on
one.
Thursday. Come for 2 hours and hear our tears and repairs. But because we really aren't just here for the ethics, we're here for the practicality, we promise. And everything else we put out is exceedingly practical, I think. Um, but instead of me and what's so popular, instead of me judging you for, oh, you've given numbed out women terrible vaginal exams, and I'm like, oh, so you can give me the best ones
Mm,
and I'm supposed to judge you? Like, so popular and so useless, right? Or for me, because I chose to walk a different ethical line where I'm like, I'm not actually going to do that. Not just because I thought at the time I was like, oh, that doesn't feel right to me. So then what did I do? I did the very first thing, the very first question. I avoided the formation. I avoided the ethical discomfort. I avoided putting myself in a position that is ethically compromising, right? But what I then found is then I put myself in a different position that's ethically compromising,
mm,
right? Of being underskilled when it matters. That's also ethically compromising. And we don't get to avoid that. But there's value in both places, there's formation in both places. And what does that mean? That means that I've seen things that you haven't seen. I've dealt with complications that you haven't dealt with. I've had complicated births that would have been transferred every time in your hundreds of births out of your scope that I have in my relative to your minimal experience. And who are we? And like, thank God we have each other, right? And the, I mean, yeah, I think that really just like, it's just such a concise example of, um, of really what we're talking about, of like bad care on the way to good care, right? And what will allow us to do that is like collaboration, skill building, and ethical resiliency, right? Which so often gets cast aside as being like, oh, like callous or like ethically inferior or like, oh, you just don't care. Or like, how could you do that? Like, it's so much simpler to chastise someone who's making a different ethical choice than you are, rather than to explore why that might be the case and what ethical choices you're making that you might not even acknowledge that you're making. Because it just took me enough circumstances of things that are complicated and of reckoning with doing, of making mistakes to actually have to come to this conclusion. And or not conclusion, but come to this experience of needing that reckoning. And like, that's really the why we're talking about bad care. Because if at the jump someone had sort of told this to me, you're going to do bad care, and it might change a woman's life forever. who are you then? And I had started with that ethical formation, we might have a lot more women that are able to sustain and skill build within the practice of midwifery, right? Because we might actually build each other up with what we found is what's needed for sustenance, which is our capacity to sit with the harder questions rather than the likelihood to avoid the harder questions through the false refuge of ideology on any side of the coin.
Mhm.
Um, okay, are we going to talk about
We can move on a little bit. Yeah.
what?
Yeah, we can go to the next point that we want to make. One thing that we open up our Born Through Movement in-person training with is just the reality of why we want to skill build and why skills matter
Mhm.
is because leaving birth alone doesn't always equal best outcomes. Like I know a lot of us know this, but sometimes we just don't remember that. And we, as humans, really care about supporting each other and making things more easeful and better where we can. And because we are a community mammal, we find so much pleasure in supporting ease in our community. And birth
What
is
do you
hella
think?
vulnerable. Huh?
That's what they say. Because we're a community mammal, we find so much pleasure in supporting ease in our community. It's just like,
Like
yeah,
that's what a midwife.
just that. It's so beautiful.
And like, yeah, you attending births and supporting something becoming more easeful gets to be pleasurable. And that gets also be the reciprocity. Like if your work was meaningless, we wouldn't want to do it either. The work is meaningful. Birth can sometimes use really good skills and support to make it more easeful. And what that might require is that you, as a birth attendant, might have to shoulder responsibility. I like this term. I don't know if we've ever heard someone else talk about it that way, but shoulder responsibility, make decisions, step into an authority role because that's being asked of you.
Mm.
That is the reality of attending birth, whether you are going with whatever title, birth keeper, doula, midwife, whatever. There might be a chance, there will be an opportunity. Opportunity is not the right word. There will be an ask of you to support decision making and possibly step into an authority role. And so we want to talk a bit about that. Because man, when you're in an authority role, that's when you can really make mistakes. Someone's looking up to you.
Right. Wow. Where do we even begin with this question?
I like how you named it benevolent authority in birth. Like there is
Mhm.
a, authority dynamics are unavoidable in birth.
I think
Yeah, go ahead.
one thing that I've just seen and one thing that I've experienced in my own life is I don't want an authority until I do. And just how humbling, just how human to want someone who has your best interest in mind to love you and protect you. And the idea that we try in our hyper individualist culture to ideologically circumvent the desire for benevolent authority feels like it's lacking in humanity and a theological denial of the reality of human existence. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And in so many areas of our life, we culture.
It's big. It's a big
Huh?
statement. It's like it's such a big statement, but it's like it's true. I think.
I mean, we love context and we love specifics. So this is the context again for this. Like in my marriage, when I'm raising my kid, when I'm new in a job, I want someone who knows more, who can give me advice, and who might help me make decisions. So why not for birth?
Right. And I think of course, like our desire for authority, but specifically our desire for benevolent authority, right? We desire benevolent authority. And I think we are wired as humans to desire benevolent authority, right? That's just like my view. And I know I share that one with you. And what I have seen is that like there is some like personal work that a lot of us that I think is part of being human, right? Around like what do I actually think about authority? Who do I actually want that? Right. And I think it's very human to spend a lot of time being like anti-authoritarian, right? It's like a phrase, anarchist, anti-authoritarian, pushing back against authority structures. It's like a rite of passage, right? And it's a rite of passage that I think in our culture that sometimes is, and I can speak for myself, but that there just wasn't a lot of formation of my maturation out of that very important time in my developmental maturity, right? To
I
step
mean,
into
it's innate to our life, like as we're kids, teenagers, becoming adults. That's
becoming young
literally
adults, like
happening.
it's what's right.
Yeah.
And I
And then
think,
there's moments like in birth where it just is different and it changes. It goes
well,
back.
I mean, I mean, I'll get to birth in a minute. I feel like I just need to like talk about this in context more broadly first, because like again, we're talking about like who are we? Like that's what they're talking about. We're like we talk all about the specifics of what to do in literally every other thing that we offer, but like who are we that allow us to do that? Like that's what we're talking about right now. And like that like maturity out of or like through into a new relationship with what authority is, right? What's like the meme is it's like I used to think that I want nobody to tell me what to do, and now I am like I would actually like someone to tell me exactly what I need to do in order with a list and then give me a gold star when it's completed. Like how many of us can like identify with that, especially as women in adulthood? Are you kidding? Right? And so
Mm.
there's like there's such a but there's just like a gap there in like what that means as like who we are and how we are in these moments that are big, in these moments like your marriage, in these moments like your parenting, these moments like your birth. Like have we actually cultivated our relational capacity and our understanding with benevolent authority and how we want to orient within that? Because then I think in the absence of that cultivation, in the absence of that maturity, right, what happens is either the desire from a birth attendant to shirk that responsibility, right? And say, I'm not the authority because we haven't actually reckoned with what it means to be a benevolent authority, to have one in the first place. Or from women saying, I don't want that, right? And then shirking any assistance. And then what often happens, and I've seen this time and time again, and I've been a part of this dynamic, truly, I'm not here on my high horse looking down. I've done this. I probably will do it again. I really want to like come to this with humility and be in our peerdom relationship around these questions, right? But like, then I don't want this authority, and I've planned my birth in a way that minimizes that until I do. And then I cast out and I cast out to my community and I put out a group thread and I call a woman that I think might know, right? And then that kind of uncontained, undeveloped, like understanding and desire of authority then lands on the women in your community who are often well meaning, right? And know a little, right? What's the Alexander Pope quote? Like, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Like, drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring, right? Like, then it's like cast out onto us, onto other women who then like try to pick up that mantle and they feel insufficient to it, because we all might feel insufficient to being a benevolent authority, of course. But if we've denied that that dynamic exists, then we're guaranteeing our own insufficiency and we're complicit in it, right? And we're complicit in it on the side of not understanding how we want to relate to authority. And we're complicit in it on being the side of not understanding how we want to offer authority, right? And that dance, right? And that willingness to like skill build and be within that is takes maturity, and it's scary. It's confronting, right?
And
Because
it often takes let's just call it a bad experience, for lack of better words. It often takes an experience where that happens to you, where either the authority is abused or you put yourself in a scenario where you wish you had it to realize, oh, this is the reality. This is what I actually want. And that's so common with birth, where you have one birth which you've planned to the nth degree, and then you're like, oh, this is actually what could have been useful. I'll change the structure for the next time.
Or like, or just these experiences for women where like I didn't want an authority until I wanted someone to tell me what to do, which is so like, can we just be in our humility of our humanity and join each other there? Where I'm like, yeah, uh-huh. I can, how many places can I look around my life and be like, I recognize that, right? In my moments of trial. That's what our moments of trial call for, right? Is like, can I look up? Right?
Mm.
That's like what they, that's like there, that is the, there's this rite of passage that's intrinsic to that. And there is, of course, in that a yes, a look within, right? I'm not saying it's one or the other, but the idea that the look without is sort of minimized, either or both of them are minimized. Kind of depends on the ideology, really.
But the
Right?
fact that you have to look up somehow reflects on your inner resource, your sovereignty, and
Or
that
the
isn't
fact,
that.
yeah, or the fact that like I feel an immense, sometimes crippling and crushing responsibility, right? If I'm being quite frank, or I'm like, whoa, how can I possibly be sufficient to the task of being an authority, right? How can I possibly do that? And that's another ethical quandary. Because if I'm unwilling to try to skill build to fill the need, like, and again, a benevolent authority, I'm not here to control and like to stay right sized and to stay understand that we're not God and we don't create the outcomes, and also to not shirk my responsibility out of an unwillingness to negotiate that ethical walk, right there. Like it's a big ask, and like I co-shoulder this responsibility ideally with other women. Right? This is why I being in midwife in private practice and like not working with a partner and like being in isolation, like it's not sustainable. I don't really know what else to say. Right. I don't know any midwife who works alone. There's like, I love it. And I wish I didn't have a
And like she's okay.
and
Doesn't
she's
even.
okay. I literally never met one. Have you?
No, I was one. I'm like, no thanks. I need four colleagues that share my load, and it's been the best. It's been the best it can be in this juncture.
And it's like in this juncture, in this moment, in this community, in its entirety of its whole ecosystem of how do we continue to be the women that are going to be able to continue to serve the women,
Mhm.
right? And like, I'm over here being like, you know, I'm going to go on sabbatical, right? Because until I can work in more collaboration and not just like moonlight in our pretend life where we work as midwives together, right? Which we've done a little bit of and it was so lovely, right? But like until there's a different circumstance, like it's generally not sustainable for most people, right? And I just this this gentle invitation for us all to be doing the lifelong work of getting clear about how we relate to authority, as opposed to the spiritual bypassing and the gaslighting that says it's not needed, right? Which is just what I see, right? Authority is not needed. I don't want to be an authority. Who does, right? Like truly from a humble heart, who's like, I want that on me. That's, it's not that you want to do that. It's like, can I carry the mantle of dignity? And am I willing to serve? Right. And if I'm willing to serve and carry that mantle of dignity, like, how can I support you if you're willing to do that? And how can we become women that are willing to help other women do that? And how in our birth culture can we acknowledge that on all sides, right? On all sides. Because what I've seen is most people are trying to do a good job. They really are. Not all, but most.
Mhm. It's true.
Yeah. And
Um,
mm, yeah.
I'm curious to know, for those who are here with us now, is there anything coming up for you that you want to name? Scenarios that come to mind that you feel are relevant or talking about? We can just give
Yeah.
it
And
space
if,
for conversation, and then we'll continue on.
yeah, if you have any thoughts or questions, comments, put them in the chat. And I know that this might seem a little far roving, right?
Mm.
Right. And I understand that. But that's also the invitation here is like, join us. Not as like the authorities who are telling you
Like how you
anything
should
other,
feel or be,
like what
yeah.
you should be doing or what your ethics should be, or like what your relationship to authority should be, or what you're like, just our walk with it and like what's helped us form our ethics and like how humbling it is, really, and how many different ways we've had to sort of how many different things we've had to try on and what a gift being willing to try them on has been, and how it's resulted, I think, for both of us in being able to provide better care, which for both of us is our North Star, right? To some extent. Um, okay, do we want to talk about this last topic, the real about
This, yeah, there's a lot.
alignment,
We
or is
can
this
we bring up like little things that annoy us when people talk about birth. One of them is,
not our icks?
well, these, welcome to our icks. Things that I think we should talk about is this term alignment, like finding your aligned client or your aligned midwife. The amount of women who want to move to Pal River because they think that I'm the most aligned provider. So we can talk about that example.
Or just like more broadly, the like, oh my God, you're the unicorn,
Mm.
right? We both get that.
Or there's no one else who's gonna allow me to have the birth I want, which is actually more like an authority thing. And then I want to talk about this idea of birth sabotage, like how your midwife sabotages your birth, and just some ideas around that. Yeah. Alignment sabotage.
Alignment, sabotage. And then I like our last two notes here. I love this, the loving midwife, and then our personal examples of one another. And I
Mhm.
think we can end it on a personal note. Um,
Connection matters, and having someone who sees your values, is respectful, can show up for you is super important. And we broadly call that alignment. My personal belief is that there's no such person who's 100% aligned, because we all react to our environment differently. We have core beliefs, we have how we react to conflict. And I'll pause there. I'm curious to know what your experience with alignment is. Women who come to you asking for alignment, or you looking for an aligned client.
I've just been humbled, really, through being like thinking that like on both sides, I've had women come and be like, I think you're exactly what I'm looking for. And me be like, oh God, how much pressure is that? Right. And then on the other side of being like, oh my God, this is the perfect family. I can serve them so well. And then being like, holy smokes, that sucked for me. Right. And I've had both of those happen. And I think what I have, I mean, that's a little flippant. Sucked for me. Like, what an opportunity to attend someone's birth. Like, I don't mean it like that. It's just like,
Hard. It was
it was
hard.
hard. It was really hard.
It
Right.
asked more of you than you thought. Usually
Asked
it's
more
like
of me in a
expectation.
way that isn't the best of me. Yeah. Just like really, which I can now say, what a gift. What a gift that is. Because it actually was part of my formation, which is like, I'm so grateful that I have and continue to grow into. But the, this
But
idea,
I
go ahead.
add that maybe even this is too, I'm realizing in this moment that women who don't know me want to come to me. It might be because they think that our ideologies match.
Mm, mhm.
And what's way more interesting to me is this topic of benevolent authority.
Yeah.
Um, where are you resourced in your life? What kind of resources do you access? How might I be a resource to you? Um, and then the reality is that I want to midwife you. I don't want to just watch your birth. I want
Mhm.
to use my skills. And how can we come into a relationship where when it comes to that time, we don't have to talk about it anymore because we've been doing that throughout your whole pregnancy.
And just this idea, like the midwifery sabotage question, it's like, oh, that a midwife wants to use her skills, and we're supposed to demonize that. They're supposed to be like, oh, everything's a hammer, everything's a nail because she's a hammer, right? Like that sort of narrative, as opposed to like, no, I've actually seen a lot. And I actually like think this is going to be helpful and actually like have a skill. And like, will it work without it? Probably. But what's the whole point? Like you and I have another call, maybe we'll link it. We have an IG live of like, we believe in midwifery care. Like we believe that we can make birth potentially, or that like, that, I mean, not necessarily, I don't mean like we, you and I mean, though, hopefully, but like that, like midwifery care in general can make birth easier for moms and babies, like as a concept, and that there are skills that allow that to be easier. And like that's a belief that we have. We wouldn't do what we do if we didn't have that belief, right? But I do think there's a lot of like resistance against that very fundamental idea, right? That there is anything to be done, right? And then, so then the question quite quickly becomes, well, what's to be done, right? And then there's like, oh, I want a woman who's exactly aligned with me about my values and my beliefs and what's to be done and has the skills and whatever, like the bar that we want, which I was, you know, I have a dear friend who I live with her family who's a family medicine physician, right? I know a lot of, I work, whatever, I know a lot of people who work in the medical field, right? And what we were talking about, and I think this is relevant here, I'm not being tangential, I promise, is like what people are like, oh, I want like all of the skill, like all of the sort of medical skill and access, and all of the holistic and integrated care, right? And perfect, like ethical and values based alignment with me personally.
Hmm.
And I'm like,
This reminds me of the quote from Pride and Prejudice, where she's like, "She must be a fearsome thing to behold. Never met such a woman," you
never
know?
met such a woman,
Yeah.
never met such a woman. Or if we're going to maybe become those women, it's going to take us 30 years in practice at least. And how do we sustain
And
unto
also, we actually want to be those women,
Of course we
right?
do.
Like that is the light that we're moving towards. And also holding the humility that that's probably never going to happen. But what fun, what a gift to keep getting better.
What a gift to keep getting better. What a gift to keep learning. What a gift to keep being humble. What a gift to keep rearranging. What a gift to keep changing your mind. What a gift to keep skill building. Right. And like, yeah, I love that you're quoting. I'm Kelly Alexander Pope and you're quoting Pride and Prejudice. It's just like
Only
amazing.
ever Pride and
Right.
Prejudice.
Oh, we can only ever be ourselves if you get to know us. Right. It's like really right in the deep cut. Um, but the like, who is she? And it's like, if I meet that woman, like, yeah, we should actually flock around her and uplift her and exalt her in her work, right? But that's not in most of our communities. And like, I think that this idea of like wanting someone who's perfectly aligned, like in my, like, what is my, like, is your husband perfectly aligned? Is your bestie perfectly aligned? Like, who are these people in our lives? It's such a rare thing, such a rare thing. And then to try to like put that into your midwifery relationship, like the expectations are just it's I don't want to say that women shouldn't want, because of course like our longing is like intrinsic to us, but I think that longing is a little misplaced, right? And I think that longing is like just sets us up to not be able to be in right relationship to each other, right? Which then paves the way for this term that you and I both hate, which is midwifery sabotage, right? Sabotage, so intense. I'm trying to sabotage means harm, means intentional, vindictive harm. I'm not saying that that never happens. I just don't think it happens very often. I think what happens,
Often as it's being described.
no, I think what happens a lot more under-resourced, exhausted, underskilled combo platter, which we're talking about how hard it is to not be that way, which doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We're literally here trying to skill everyone and help them with their ethics. It's like what we're trying to do and ourselves first and foremost. But like I think that's what's happening more, or just like what we're actually expecting is that like incredible handholding and that incredible presence and that incredible orientation and the ability to be that benevolent authority and have all of these skills and do it all in the same moment. And have you ever knocked it out of the park, Mandy? I know I feel like I know you
I
have. I feel like you could be like, yeah.
would never admit. I
But
mean,
like
there's times where I come back from birth, I'm like, I did so good.
I did so good, right? And like I have also knocked it out of the park. I'm just gonna say that. I'm like, there's been moments where I'm like, wow, I really it was a good midwife, you know what I mean? But I'm like, you too. But like that's and like amazing. That's amazing. Thank God. And then we get to continue potentially, but like there's been other times like the ask is a lot and that doesn't mean that we're not sufficient to it. It just means that like this emphasis on like that alignment as opposed to how can I be in relationship, right, with a real person? And how can I be willing to have a good outcome, really, right? With that individual relationship. Like we talk about this with marriage, like we're both like, we are joking, not joking, but like both proponents of arranged marriage, right? Where we're like, if you're both dedicated, it can probably just work out fine. And like we both live in that land. And like and there's a beauty in that, and like we joke about this in regards to midwifery practice as well. It's like this hyper emphasis on uh, like it just I think it can set us up in a way that isn't grounded in reality, right? That's grounded in imaginary land or like ideology ultimately, which
Hmm.
I think can be harmful. I think it can be harmful, and I'm not saying it's not beautiful. I'm just trying to be helpful for what's real, right, and serve women with what's real, which might not be perfect alignment. It's very rare, which maybe gets us to our points on perfect midwife or loving midwife and like our relationship. What?
Yeah, I learned this. It wasn't like I had a hard experience that I had to reckon with this, but it was like a gentle reminder that, choosing a doula who matches my current ideology doesn't mean she's going to show up that way. And for my second birth, I wanted, so interesting, I wanted someone who I hired who was aligned with my ideology, but I wanted the women who truly loved me to be at my birth. And so for my second, I experienced both. Like, I want the perfect birth attendant, and I want women who just love me. So I kind of got the best of like the best of one world and then kind of like the shitty of the other because this doula showed up and midwifed me, and I didn't want her to midwife me. But we never talked about that. It's like, oh, you're fine with, coming to my birth without my midwife being present? Yeah, great. You're the perfect person for me. Turns out she was not at all. And I didn't have the awareness, the brain cells, to even know that that was less important, that ideology, than how you actually show up for me. And then I was like, I thought my best friends there because I know how they show up for me when things are hard. When things get really hard in my birth, this is who I want to be looking into my eyeballs.
Which like we put here the perfect midwife or the loving midwife, right? We're like, I can't be the perfect midwife, but I can be a loving one.
Mm.
And uh, like
The
that.
loving one. And also, what I'm now more interested in is the midwife who can own her mistakes, who wants to do better, and who's interested in working it out and like maintaining relationship after conflict. Oh my gosh. Super hard, but worth.
Ethics,
Worth.
communication, skill building, like capacity beyond ideology, willingness to be wrong, willingness to change your mind, willingness to be honest with your client about your ethics, and to even be honest with yourself, right? So I can like be in loving relationship and like that's important. And like we've been joking for years how I'm like how Mandy is gonna like come and be with me for my births, right? Because who else, right? And like and because you love me and like you're like, yeah, I'd move my whole family to wherever you are.
And we're so aligned.
And we're so aligned. We literally talk about like our like we have work that's literally about our alignment and we love each other, right? And like to be clear, we are actually aligned and we are actually in love. Like those are
Tongue in cheek, but
actually
it's also true.
true. Like we're joking, but like so obviously Mandy.
Yeah.
And do you want to tell the story about?
Yeah, like I want to know what the story, but the reality is that if I was Adelaide's midwife, it would be probably the hardest birth I'll ever attend because I'll be a nervous wreck and everything I do matters so much more because of our deeply intimate relationship.
I think of the scenario that you were sharing about a midwife who she was attending her best friend, and the only episiotomy she ever did in her entire midwifery career was on her bestie because
My colleague in, I won't say where, one of my colleagues who'd been practicing for 25 years
a long time, women, 25 years.
attended her colleague's birth. So they had worked together for maybe like 5 or so years, but like they were partners. There was two midwives in a practice. The only episiotomy she ever did was on that colleague because she cared about her and her baby to the highest degree and acted on it, right?
In a way that, like, okay, you see her in those D cells and a heart rate, you're seeing something complicated, and in a different scenario, you might be able to be like, I'm gonna take a beat here, and I'm gonna like not be in my emotions of like the child of my heart that's been prayed for by my best friend, and to think that that doesn't like influence the care. Everyone's like, I want my best, and like my friends ask me, you know what I mean? As I mean, maybe this is a little different for you, but like my friends ask me to attend their births. It's a very big part of my life. It has been for years. And I'm like, how can I return to being the loving midwife, not the perfect one, right? And I think that, like,
And it can go both ways, right? So we're giving this episiotomy example, but a personal example for me is I went to my best friend's birth. We were living in the same house. We both had our second babies in that house. Like the most magic you could ever create.
yeah, like,
And
yeah, you living with your bestie,
and she
pregnant
worked for our
together.
practice, like it's a whole thing. And I'm at her second baby's birth, and I withheld care because I didn't want to medicalize her. Or actually, it was her baby. And it can go both ways where you care so much and you just react, and it might not be the best.
Like, there's
And
a
that's
reason.
the reality of it.
Yeah. And like, and to be clear, we don't have any answers here.
No answer. But
Like, I'm
maybe
here to
just know that if you invite your best friend midwife to your birth, she's gonna have a really hard time.
Um, you're, I feel like Maddie's speaking directly to me, but don't worry.
But I'm
I
still gonna go, obviously, to your
obviously, right, we'll organize our whole lives around it because guess what? It's complex. And we're just wanting to invite all of us into these conversations, right? And just like have this soft landing place outside of like hierarchy, ideology, good care, bad care, and land in like a welcome place of like, you're gonna do bad care. Who are we then? How do we uphold each other then? You're gonna do good care. How do we not then fall into the hubris of thinking that that's because of what we thought, right? How do we continue to be in our learning? How do we continue to be in our ethical formation? How do we continue to try to be the women that we're all dreaming of? And how do we sustain each other along that walk? And I know for us, had we been, and it's been years now, and what a cool thing, right? That we're in relationship after years of friendship and years of collaboration. And like, I mean, 4 years isn't that long, but it's not a month, you know, where like throughout that entire time, we came together because we were willing to be open about these big ethical questions. And there's nothing that's allowed me to grow more in my service to women, potentially, than like my relationship to you and through you to these ethical questions. And like, look at our work now, where it's arguably both entirely transformed and still right where it started somehow. And like, oh, I just, if we're offering this call for free, right? Because this is just like what we want for all of you. Like, how do we actually like support each other? Like in the inquiry and in the skill building and in the learning and in the ethical formation and in the mantle of dignity that is service to each other. in a way that allows us to keep doing it. And like, I know for both of us, being able to have these questions be alive allows me to keep this love alive for women. And like, that's what we want to do for you.
Mhm. And truly the greatest gift when the real crisis was happening 4 years ago was you unlicensed looking at me and being like, I just see you in this and I don't judge you for what you're doing. What a gift.
And me being like, I'm at a birth, underskilled, truly. What's happening? And you being like, I think this is what's happening. I've only seen it twice, so I'm not surprised you don't know anything about it, but I happen to. And I
Mm.
don't judge you for not knowing. And I'm going to help you help that mom and baby. We're both going to cry.
I'm
Like,
crying.
I'm crying already. Like, it's just like, this is what has allowed us to like truly try to like provide care. And like, it's so life-giving. And I, and we, for women who want to serve in birth, like, this is where we want to invite you, is not into the answers, but into the questions, and not into the care, but into the service.
Mm.
Right. And like, I just am so grateful that anyone who's even listening to this talk is willing to sit with these questions and willing to sit with us as we imperfectly navigate them in perpetuity. Right. The joke, I was just listening to Encanto because I'm obsessed with Lin-Manuel Miranda. If anyone is familiar with Under Pressure, this song from Encanto, which is like my anthem of just like trying humbly to like do it right, but like what if all the balls drop, you know? Like, oh, like let's not do that to one another. Let's do this instead. And like, obviously we're talking about this at this time. I mean, one, because we're talking about this in constantly in our lives, in our birth work, and like, and not just in our birth work, in our body work, in our community work, in our church work. Like, it's just like this like, you know, it's like this is truly embodied. I know for both of us, it's one reason we're friends. But like the like at this time, like we're relaunching Born Through Movement, which came out a year ago and was born from our collaboration of like, I think this is important. And you being like, me too. And like, how can we make theories and how can we actually humbly put forth something that isn't true, but is an offering to our community that you can try it out and then we can see what happens. Like, this is like science, like truly, like, oh, you propose a theory and then people are willing to try it. And then they're willing to tell you, and then you're willing to re-theorize, then you're willing to try it, and then you're willing to actually create better medical care, right? Or midwifery care, whatever you want to call it. Like, that doesn't even matter, the labeling. But like, and then what we've gotten that capacity to do is have this work be out there for a year and have truly hundreds and hundreds of women be like, this helped me. And then a not insufficient number, significant number being like, I did it all and it didn't work at all. And I'm like,
Mm.
oh, thank God you're telling me so that we can look at you now and like, well, what's happening there? And we can continue to try and figure it out. Like, you know, and like try to think about it. I have an amazing student. She like really did all my strength training with me. She like worked with me one-on-one. She comes with Q&A. She's like in it. And then she had like a complicated 4-day OP labor ending in a section after 2 previous uncomplicated home births. And I'm like, bummer. Okay, who are we now? How do I incorporate that and not be like, it's the outlier? Even though it is the outlier, doesn't mean it's unimportant, doesn't mean it's not offering something, right? And like, just that, encouragement, and like, this is what we're now offering. And then we're now teaching these trainings live. You should come join us in Sebastopol, California, right? If you want a 4-day training about hands-on movement and assessment, or hands-on manipulation and movement assessment, like, we're just trying to put this work out there, and what being able to engage with like the future of birth work requires. I mean, I like, for me, I should say, and I think for you, and I'll let you speak for yourself in a moment, like, is I'm not trying to like revolutionize, I'm not trying to change, I'm not trying to like, you know, create an entirely different birth culture. Just like, can we serve? Can we try it out? Can we help each other? Like, not the movement, just the work, just the day in, day out skill building and community work over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, rather than the ideas and the movement and the ideology and the revolution and the what, like, just humbly learn this. Hopefully it's helpful. Give us a little feedback. Hopefully that's helpful. And onward we go.
Mm.
And if you want the specifics, honeys, we have all the actual specific talks. What are the ones? Okay, actually, before we even talk about that, Mandy, do you have any thoughts on this before we wrap up? Because it's 6:15 and we said that we would end at 90 minutes, and we're going to hit the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, I think this talk is important, but I definitely don't want to spend years talking about context and thoughts. I just want to chop wood, carry water.
Chop wood,
And
carry water, baby.
so both of our work is that. So you're probably not going to have us talk like this again.
Ever again.
Ever
You caught
again.
it. One and done
Yeah.
as a
If you
result.
want the skills, we are now in a place where like, well, I think we have to do this work and share it and teach people.
And teach
So
people.
you also get to tell us what you're interested in learning that you feel is lacking in your own community in
And we'll
terms of,
see if we can help you. We'll see. Who knows? But the one that has been a big ask for us is vaginal tears, which, oh, trust me, we have a lot to say on that. So come on Thursday, right, on vaginal tears. And then we're going to have another talk the following week. So just be following both of our social media, right? You'll have access to those calls in Born Through Movement, right? Which is our study on birth biomechanics, somatically connecting, and how babies actually move through the pelvis. It's like the thing that's the most, I think, applicable for me personally in my birth work practice. I've used those skills more than any other, because I just have to tell you again, practically, birth is the movement of the tissue from the inside of the body to the outside of the body. So if we're not studying how tissue moves, what are we doing? Right? It's like the most important, it's like what actually needs to happen in birth is movement of tissue. So if we're not studying how tissue moves, we maybe have lost the plot, right? So like, that's our Bone Through Movement course. It's on sale right now for the next week, for Holy Week, right? For it's like 50% off. And so that's amazing, but mostly because we just like want this work to be out there, right? And then we're continuing to have chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water, chop wood, carry water. But we also want you to be sustained in your capacity to do that. And this is just our conversation about what personally has allowed us to be sustained in the unglorified, bad care to good care, ethically rife, complicated, and emotionally significant walk that is choosing service to women. And we love you.
Amazing.
All right. Any final thoughts? Okay.
Yeah.
I love you. Thank
I
God
love
for
it.
you today. Okay. We'll end it there. Women, feel free to reach out to either of us. And thank you so much for your interest in the soup. Bye for now.